Hey everybody, and welcome back to Paleologic. I'm your host, and today we are talking about the weird life cycle of the bagworm moth. We're going to take a look at what they are, their life cycle, and some of the damage they can do. So, let's get into it. The bagworm moth is part of the family of insects known as... There are more than 1,300 described species in this family. But one of the most recognizable features of the bagworm moth is obviously the way that the larva makes their casings. This is very unique in the insect world, and a lot of the time, the casing is specifically tailored to the area where that caterpillar is living. So it could be made of sand, or leaves, or twigs. It kinda depends on what's available to them. The main thing is that it is primarily made out of silk, just like a spider's web. Caterpillars in the Psychidae family spin a silk casing, and then they go out and find leaves, twigs, little pieces of bark, and they add these to the outside of their silk casing to make it look like a little twig. And this helps protect them from being eaten by birds and other predators. Now, because there are so many different kinds of bagworm moths, they all don't necessarily use the same host plant. So, they're not all eating the same thing. Some prefer certain trees or shrubs, and the larvae will actually move around their casing to kind of get to the new leaves. The head and thorax of the larva actually sticks out of the casing as it feeds. So, it will extend those two segments out and then retract them back in when it is done eating. And then, once it's ready to pupate, it will just seal up the opening of its casing and stay inside until it is ready to emerge as an adult. And the adults are completely different looking from the larvae. They look like typical moths, whereas the larvae look very unique and very different. And because of this, it took a long time for naturalists to realize that they were in fact related. In the past, the bagworm moth has been used in traditional medicine in some cultures, but it hasn't really continued into modern practices. So these days, it's mostly known for being a pest in forestry and ornamental plant care. In particular, in the United States and parts of Asia, there are two invasive species of bagworm that are considered serious pests. One is the oriental bagworm, which is native to Asia and Europe, and the other is the larger bagworm, which is native to Eastern Asia, Japan, and India. These two species have spread to North America, South Africa, and Australia. And they're considered pests because they can cause significant damage to the trees that they infest. The larger bagworm. Now, this is the one that can cause the most damage. And the larvae of this species can grow to be almost 6 inches long. That's like half a meter. That's huge. Now, normally, the length of a caterpillar tells you how big of a moth it's going to be, right? But that's not the case with the larger bagworm. The adult form of this insect is pretty small. It only grows to about half an inch, less than a centimeter. And this is pretty fitting, because even though the larvae are huge, they're not able to fly, so they kind of have to be big, strong crawlers. They cannot fly away from predators. So instead, they crawl away from predators by hiding in their little twiggy casing. And this means that they're still vulnerable. So a lot of times, they also cover themselves with a layer of guanine. And this reflects UV light and makes the caterpillar almost invisible to predators. They also might blend in with the leaves that they're eating. So that helps hide them too. But if a bird does eat them, the hairs on the larva are actually poisonous. So birds will often regurgitate them. So basically, this caterpillar has gone through so many adaptations to help it survive, like the casing, the guanine, and the poisonous hairs. But despite all that, it still doesn't fly. So there was a study done in 2023 by a group of Chinese researchers, and in this study, they decided to raise some of these larger bagworm moths and see if they would eventually grow wings and be able to fly. Now, some of the individuals did end up developing wings, but none of them were able to fly. None of the individuals had fully developed wings either. And none of the individuals lived long enough to see if they could have developed the muscles necessary to fly. And the reason why they're not able to fly could be because of something called neoteny, is when young characteristics persist into adulthood. So for example, axolitos are neotenic salamanders, and they retain their larval gills into adulthood. It is Kind of like if a human child was born, and it still had a pacifier and was still crying all the time. It's just kind of odd. It's not quite normal. And this could be what's happening with the larger bat. Something went wrong somewhere along the evolutionary line, where it should have lost those larval traits, but it didn't. On the flip side, the adult bagworm moths are great at flying. They are strong flyers, and that's how they're able to travel so far. That's how the invasive species ended up in Australia and South Africa and North America. Adult bagworm moths can fly over big swaths of land and ocean to find new host plants. The females are the ones that lay eggs, and then they die after they do that. But the males live longer, and they mate multiple times. Now, there's a lot of variation within the Psychidae family, and there's a lot of different behaviors among the members. For instance, some of the species, the females, actually leave the casing, but they don't develop wings, so they kind of scoot around on the ground. Like I said, there's a lot of variation in this family, but with the larger bagworm, the female typically stays in the casing her whole life. She never leaves. And the male will come into the casing to fertilize her eggs, and then he'll go off to do whatever it is that males do. And then she will lay eggs, and she will just keep laying eggs throughout her life. Sometimes hundreds of eggs. And these eggs hatch into male and female bagworm moths. So it's a male-female pairing. The males will leave the casing and go off to find food, and then they will come back to the casing to mate with the females. So there's this interesting dynamic between the males and females of the species. The females never leave the casing. The males do, but they come back to mate. And then after mating, they go back off to go find more food. Now, because these species are invasive in so many areas, they can cause a lot of problems. Even though a lot of times we think of caterpillars as being bad because they're pests, they do play an important role in the ecosystem by recycling nutrients. They eat the plants and they poop out nutrients. But when they become invasive, that's when they cause a problem. And one study found that they compete with native caterpillars for resources. This study was done in South Africa, and it found that the invasive bagworm moths compete with native caterpillars for those host plants. And that's kind of the crux of the issue with invasive species. You bring a species into a new environment, and you want to know what the consequences are going to be. You don't know how it's going to affect the food chain. You don't know how it's going to affect the balance of power there. You just don't know what's going to happen. And that's why it's always encouraged that you don't release invasive species into new environments. And one thing that can help reduce the impact of these invasive species is just being aware of them. So if you know what they look like, you can report it. There are hotlines and things you can do to get in touch with officials who will come and help you identify whether or not what you have is actually an invasive species. And then they will help treat the problem if it is. So, don't be afraid to call. Don't be afraid to speak up if you think something's wrong. As for the treatment of these invasive species, there are ways to deal with them. There are insecticides you can use, and there are natural predators that can help keep populations down, like ladybugs, lacewings, and parasitic wasps. Those are all predators of the bagworm moth. So, encouraging those in your garden can help reduce the population of the bagworm moths. But if you have a massive infestation, you might need to call in the professionals. So, the bagworm moth is a super interesting creature. It has a weird life cycle. It has a super long larva stage and a really short adult stage. And it's a good example of an organism that is highly specialized. It's really good at doing one thing. It's really good at surviving. And it's definitely an organism worth keeping an eye on. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give me a like. You can follow me on social media. And thank you guys again for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.